old Draymond Green and Kevin Durant. Boy, you two, y'all come here. Nah, that's okay. Both you turkeys have both said that 2015 through 2019 era was the best era of the NBA. And we're actually Stephen A. Smith and Wendy and Gilbert Arenas were talking. Gilbert was trying to justify it. Now, I'm going to tell you this. 5 straight finals appearances, 3 chips, including the best regular season record. And you had one man in LeBron James who went to the finals every year from 2011 to 2020. So you represented. But does that mean that was the best, or what was it? Let's look at that decade, shall we? Because after you look at that Golden State run, they did win. They did win. And they did have a situation where they had to go get Kevin Durant, which they did after winning 73 games. I will give you that, they did. But remember, they had to go get him after they had won. But Durant puts himself in the middle of that. So is this to say, well, we couldn't beat him, so we had to join him because this was the best? Well, Durant, LeBron, and Steph Curry, 3 of the greatest players ever. And then the Kawhi Leonard considered great. But, what about that Dirk Nowitzki chip with Dallas? That kind of puts a damper, or the Spurs in between. So when you say best era, you're just acting like Magic and the Lakers didn't matter in the 80s, and Isaiah and the Pistons didn't matter in the 80s, and Bird and the Celtics didn't matter in the 80s, and that 444 with Moses Dr. J didn't matter in the 80s. You're trying to say that wasn't exciting, compelling, because that to me is still the greatest era I ever saw. Oh, that I ever saw. Because everybody had identity. You had real interesting teams. You had teams like the Milwaukee Bucks back then, the Dallas Mavericks, the Utah Jazz, the San Antonio Spurs, the Portland Trailblazers that were interesting and entertaining. And the Denver Nuggets, you had compelling stories. And Golden State, you had some real interesting stories that though some of those teams didn't compete. And the Atlanta Hawks, you had some compelling stories. And the New York Knicks, you had compelling stories. See where I'm going with this? Now, you asked me about the 90s. Everybody dominated. Pistons dominated. The Bulls dominated. And then the Rockets dominated. And the Spurs started up their thing. You had some interesting storylines. I mean, you had Utah was interesting. Seattle was interesting to an extent. Portland was interesting. It's probably one of my least favorites in terms of the fact that there wasn't what I call genuine parity because it was dominant. So